Before a record is corroborated, a manipulative structure depends on one condition holding. Isolation. One voice, one account. One person left carrying sequence, memory, tone, and consequence alone. That arrangement gives the structure room to do what it does best. Attack delivery, question motive, reframe injury as instability. Turn the witness into the problem so the record never gets examined. This file opens after the condition starts failing. The witness is no longer the only place the truth can be found. Support has entered the record. Let the record reflect. The burden shifted in the previous file. The strain moved. The demand to answer moved. The expectation that one exhausted person keep translating the whole sequence by hand began to break. This file takes the next procedural step. The question before the room is no longer whether the witness can carry the account alone. The question is whether the record now contains independent support for what the witness already said. That is corroboration, not louder accusation, not cleaner presentation, independent support. A statement lines up with a timestamp. A denial collides with deletion. A revised story appears after review begins. The sequence starts holding its own weight. Opening Case File 13, Corroboration.
The record gains a second voice.
One account can be targeted. A corroborated account changes posture. A manipulative structure can spend months, sometimes years, grinding down one witness. It can call that person bitter, obsessive, dramatic, unstable, vindictive, or confused. It can make the room study tone instead of conduct. It can ask whether the witness is calm enough, polished enough, healed enough, agreeable enough to deserve examination. That is the cruelty of isolation. The truth can be standing in the room the whole time, and people still treat it like a personality issue because only one person is carrying it. Then the record gains a second voice. Sometimes that second voice is a message. Sometimes it's a timestamp. Sometimes it is another person who finally saw enough to stop pretending they did not. And in real life, that shift is not small. The witness has already been punished for telling the truth before support ever arrives. Labeled difficult, called unstable, treated like the disruption instead of the warning. Then support enters. A message supports the timeline. The timeline supports the conduct. The conduct supports the witness. Now the room is no longer staring at one voice in isolation. Now the room is staring at alignment. That is the first break in the structure. The witness no longer has to carry the entire burden of being believed through force of personality. The record starts helping. And that is one of the ugliest truths in the case like this. Many people do not recognize the witness was telling the truth until the truth starts showing up somewhere else they consider safer, cleaner, or easier to trust. Still, once the second voice enters, the file changes. What sounded like one person's complaint starts reading like corroborated sequence. The witness was not wrong early. The room was late.
We have operated with complete transparency throughout
Versions
this entire
change
process.
under review.
I don't know anything about that, I swear.
Corroboration often appears in the split between one version of events and the version that shows up after review starts. Before scrutiny, the language is usually sharp, plain, certain. The respondent speaks as if comparison will never happen. The story comes out fast. The frame is narrow. The confidence is high. After scrutiny, the language changes. Now the story grows context. Now the edges soften. Now certainty becomes fog. The same person who sounded exact begins widening the frame, introducing qualifiers, retreating into vagueness, and asking the room to tolerate imprecision. That split sits in the record without needing much interpretation. What was said before review looks one way. What gets said after begins to look another. So the room has a clean question in front of it. What changed? Who changed it? Why did that change arrive only after contradiction entered the room? Variance under review is not a mood problem. It is a record problem. Once the room sees variance, the witness is no longer standing there alone trying to explain shift. The shift is visible on its own.
Cleanup enters the record.
This is where the file gets sharper. People see cleanup and assume it weakens the event. Not always. Sometimes the cleanup is the confirmation. An apology arrives after receipts. A softer tone appears after contradiction. A plea for a nuance enters only after the plain version of events is no longer easy to maintain. Not remorse, not resolution. Remedial conduct. What gets deleted enters the file. What gets revised enters the file. What suddenly becomes misunderstood after proof appears enters the file. The original event tells the room what happened. The cleanup tells the room what could not remain in circulation without adjustment. Cleanup is not separate from the conduct. It is the conduct entering correction mode. The wording shifts. The profile lowers. The sequence still gives it away. Now the question is no longer whether the respondent tried to calm the room. The question is why the room needed calming only after the record became reviewable. What happened enters evidence. What happened after enters evidence too.
The story was handled.
Corroboration is not limited to the core event. It also lives in the handling around the event. Who saw the original version? Who passed it forward? Who softened it? Who brought the cleanup version back into circulation? That is record handling. A coordinated structure rarely runs on one voice alone. One person pressures, another reframes, another buys time, another enters as the responsible one, the reasonable one. Another translates obvious injury into miscommunication while the structure regains footing. The record does not only preserve conduct, it preserves custody. How the story moved, who carried it, who adjusted it, who tried to stabilize it after contradiction entered the room. So the room is no longer looking at a story that simply drifted. The room is looking at a story that was handled. Not confusion, not accident, handling. That distinction is cold, but it is clean. Once the record shows management, innocence gets harder to perform.
Insider confirmation enters.
Corroboration gets colder when support comes from inside the structure itself. Not rumor, not speculation, access. This is the person who stood close enough to the harm to hear the private version before the public version was adjusted. The person who knew what was said behind closed doors, what was denied in front of other people, and what changed once review started. That is insider confirmation. It does not always arrive through conscience. A lot of time it arrives through fallout. The insider may speak because the witness was right all along and the insider finally sees it. They may speak because they got lied to too. They may speak because they helped carry a version of events that later turned on them. They may speak because the same person who harmed the witness eventually harmed them too. That is part of the reality the file has to name. The witness is often called bitter, dramatic, or unstable until the abuser reaches the next person in line. Then suddenly the truth becomes easier for the room to hear. That is not justice in its purest form. It is spillover. It is delayed recognition. It is the truth getting believed only after it becomes expensive to someone else. So the insider does not have to come forward with clean motives to become useful to the record. They may be angry. They may be embarrassed. They may be retaliating. They may be trying to expose the very person they once helped protect. Even then, the evidentiary value remains, not because the insider is noble, because the structure has started breaking from the inside. Now, the witness no longer has to keep reopening the wound just to prove it existed. Someone from inside the structure is confirming what the witness was carrying alone the whole time. That is vindication in one of its coldest forms. The witness does not have to chase belief anymore. The record starts producing it through collapse, contradiction, and inside exposure. The witness was never the only one who knew. They were the only one willing to stand in the truth before it became costly for everyone else.
Retaliation is confirmation.
Corroboration does not always arrive as support. It can also arrive as backlash. The scramble after exposure belongs in the record. The pressure campaign belongs in the record. The sudden effort to discredit the witness belongs in the record. So does the insider's retaliation after learning they were lied to, used, or sacrificed by the same person they once helped protect. The structure does not only harm the original witness, often it harms the people who helped stabilize the lie. Once that happens, loyalty breaks, silence breaks. The story starts leaking from inside the walls that were supposed to contain it. This is retaliatory conduct, not only from the respondent, in some cases from the insider too. The room needs to understand that clearly. People do not always come forward because they became morally brave overnight. A lot of them come forward because the abuse finally reached them. Others come forward because they were made to carry a lie, then got discarded once the lie became harder to hold. That does not erase what they helped do. It does explain why the truth starts moving. Now the witness's account no longer sits alone. The exposure spreads, the silence fractures. The structure starts confirming itself through its own fallout.
Pattern as evidence.
By this stage, the room is no longer evaluating one isolated event in a vacuum. It is evaluating the structure that produced the event, handled the event, revised the event, and reacted to review of the event. That is pattern evidence, not branding, not self-description, pattern. What repeats? What shifts only after scrutiny? Who gets protected? Who absorbs the cost? Where the fog appears, where precision disappears, pattern narrows interpretation. Anyone can describe themselves as hurt, stressed, human, misunderstood, or overwhelmed. The record is not limited to self-description. The record tracks direction. Where does pressure land? Who benefits from confusion? Who gets framed as excessive for naming what the sequence already shows? This is where the file stops asking who sounds better and starts asking what pattern the conduct keeps serving. That is character evidence in case file form, not who someone claims to be, who the record keeps revealing under pressure.
Convergence on the record.
Convergence is the point where separate strands stop reading like coincidence and start reading like support. The witness says one thing. The timeline supports it. The revision support it. The handling supports it. The insider supports enters. The reaction supports it too. This is convergence, not a perfect witness, not a perfect room. A record that keeps arriving at the same conclusion from more than one entry point. And in real life, this is the moment the lie starts losing clean places to stand. Too many people have seen part of it. Too many versions exist. Too much handling has already been exposed. Too much fallout is now on the record. At that stage, denial does not disappear. It changes form. It stops sounding like doubt. It starts sounding like maintenance. This is what people need to understand. Convergence does not mean everyone suddenly becomes honest. It means the structure can no longer keep the truth confined to one exhausted person. Now, the witness does not have to explain every wound from the beginning again. Now the record can survive even if the witness goes quiet. Now the truth has too many points of contact to be buried as easily as before. Charm can pressure one voice. It has a harder time neutralizing convergence. The room may still delay. The room may still hedge. The room may still protect its own comfort. Even then, the posture has changed. The file no longer depends on isolated testimony surviving attack. It survives through corroborated convergence. That is not full justice. It is something colder. The moment the truth no longer needs permission to keep standing. This is not final ruling. This is the threshold before ruling becomes easier to justify out loud.
Posture of record accounting required.
Let the record reflect. This file does not close on accusation. It closes on confirmation. What was dismissed when carried by one person becomes harder to dismiss when the record starts lining up on its own. When the private version breaks containment, when the handling shows, when the reaction tells on the event. That is the turn in this file. Not repair, not redemption, confirmation. The room may still delay. The room may still protect its favorites. The room may still act like supported truth is somehow still up for personality review. Even so, something has already been lost. The structure no longer has exclusive control over the story it was trying to manage. That is what corroboration changes. It takes what was easiest to deny in isolation and puts it in company. Now the account has to stand by itself. Now the denials do not stand by themselves either. And once that happens, confusion stops sounding innocent. Silence stops sounding neutral. Delay stops sounding procedural. Directive. Stop asking whether the witness can tell it better. Start asking why so many parts of the record are landing in the same place. Start asking what had to be softened, who had to be quiet, and why the truth became easier to hear only after it spread. Case posture update. Corroboration established. Installation breach. Exposure is no longer contained. Case file 13, corroboration. Status, confirm beyond isolation. What was easiest to deny alone is no longer alone. I am Woofy. Welcome to the Resistance.